Welcome, American literature friends. This is going to be a short video that covers Ambrose Bierce and an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. I want to talk really briefly about Ambrose Bierce, the person and the writer, and then we'll jump into the story and the three sections of it and try to explain what each section is doing, what's happening, and connect all of the pieces of them too. If you have a book, this is on page 394 in the book. There's also a link in D2L that goes through a chronology of Ambrose Bierce's life that has more specific information. I just wanted to cover a couple of parts of it. Bierce was born in 1842 in Ohio. He's from a big family, like a lot of families back then. He worked as a printer, but the big event, the sort of turning point of his young life, is when the Civil War broke out in the early 1860s. As they tell you in the book, Bierce, he joined the Union Army during the Civil War. He saw action in some of the bloodiest battles of the war, including Shiloh in Tennessee, Chickamauga in North Georgia, and the Atlanta Campaign. And then at Kennesaw Mountain in 1864, he was struck in the temple by a bullet that miraculously lodged beneath the skin without penetrating the skull. So he was wounded in battle. After the Civil War, he moved to the West Coast to San Francisco, and that is when his writing career really began. He started work, and he made most of his living through most of the rest of his life working as a journalist. San Francisco in the late 1860s and 1870s was becoming home to a journalism-based literary culture, as they tell you in the book. And he did a bunch of journalistic writing, including he worked for William Randolph Hearst, who in the 1880s, 1890s, and early 1900s was by far and away the most powerful media corporation. There was a time period when William Randolph Hearst owned like 90% of all of the newspapers and magazines, all the media in the United States. He largely controlled the media, and he had a group of favorite reporters that he liked, including Ambrose Bierce. Ambrose Bierce was one of his favorites. As they tell you in the book, from 1886 to 1906, he was employed by William Randolph Hearst's San Francisco Examiner. And it was really because of Hearst's influence and Hearst's favoritism that he had so much success. However, in the late 1880s, Bierce had this series of tragedies in his life that really influenced his life. He and his wife got divorced they separated in 1888, got divorced a few years later. They had 3 children. One of his sons was shot to death in 1889. The other died from pneumonia in 1913. So often he is referred to as Bitter Bierce in the 1890s and early 1900s, but it's clearly because he had this series of tragedies in his life, the divorce, the death of his kids, those kinds of things. And then the most famous thing that's associated with Bierce now is the end of his life, because, and they talk about this in the third paragraph on 394, Bierce went to Mexico in 1913 and disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to him. He went to Mexico. He was supposed to cover the Mexican Revolution, and he was trying to embed himself with Pancho Villa and the Mexican revolutionaries, but he went down there to cover them and never came back. He sent a postcard to one of his nieces from the United States-Mexico border, and that was the last anybody heard of him in early 1914. The two things he is most famous for now are An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which is by far and away his most famous piece of literature, his most famous piece of writing. The reason he's in literature textbooks is Owl Creek Bridge and its sort of landmark use of the twist ending, the plot twist at the end, and a thing that he made called the Devil's Dictionary, which was almost like Urban Dictionary for the 1890s and the early 20th century, because it was this sort of joke dictionary that had a bunch of funny definitions of words in it. There's a link to the Devil's Dictionary in D2L if you want to look up some of the funny definitions. But it is this sort of funny, sarcastic dictionary that he compiled and created with all these funny definitions for words. Like I said, though, Owl Creek Bridge, which he wrote in 1890, 1891, the early 1890s, is by far and away his most famous piece of literary writing. It has 3 sections, and it's useful to think of it in 3 sections because you need to, in some ways, think about the way the three sections fit together. The first section sets the scene, and it really sets the tone for the whole story. Bierce is considered one of the key figures of American realism, and there's a video about realism and the definition of realism, that terminology, that concept that is connected to this. Bierce, Mark Twain is probably the most famous American writer of the realistic period, but An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge and Bierce very clearly fit into that realism tradition, and Bierce is often taught as like a key figure on the Mount Rushmore of American realism. One of the reasons for that is because of this first section of An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. American realism was really popular beginning in the 1860s. It's this literary movement that begins in the 1860s. It really carries through in America until the 19-teens, World War I. And you can really see that in section 1 because of the way that you get this straightforward, realistic, almost journalistic, scientific reporting of basic information. And that's what the first section of this story is designed to do, is give you this, to make you feel like just a set of facts is being reported to you. You're just getting this straightforward, not emotional, not from anybody's like intense, unreliable perspective, but just this straightforward, objective reporting of facts, this almost scientific reporting or description of a scene. And that scene is a man stood on a railroad bridge in northern Alabama looking down into the swift waters 20 feet below. And what you get in that first section is this description of the Union Army, which is advancing east from Mississippi into northwest Alabama, and they have caught a Confederate traitor and are going to hang him from this bridge. The rope closely encircled his neck, so you have this company of Union soldiers with the sergeant standing on a board above the river. And what happens at the end of the first section is the board is balanced on these 2 or 3 cross beams of the bridge. And at the end of that first section, the sergeant steps off of one end of the board, and the man, who you find out his name is Peyton Farquharson, at the end of the first section, he's standing on the other end of the board. So when the sergeant steps off one end, the board tips down and Farquharson drops through the gap between the boards on the train bridge and is falling to his death to be hung. A sentinel at each end of the bridge stood with his rifle. You get that description. It's on page 395 in the book. There's also a link to the story right here. See if I can make it bigger so I can show you where we're talking about. The man who was engaged, this is Peyton Farquharson, the main character in the story. The man who was engaged in being hanged was apparently about 35 years of age. He was a civilian. That's one of the important ideas in this, is that Farquharson was a civilian. He was not a member of the Confederate Army, but he was a Confederate sympathizer, and he was trying to burn down the bridge to slow down the Union Army coming east across Alabama as they were winning the Civil War. You get that description. Beyond one of the sentinels, nobody was in sight. The railroad ran straight away into a forest for 100 yards. That's important because southeast is where Farquharson's home is, and when he runs away in the third section of this story and runs home, the Union Army is coming from the northwest, heading southeast into Alabama. That's important because you get that description of the forest, and when he is wandering at the end of section 3, he wanders all day through this forest. The man who was engaged in being hanged was apparently about 35. He was a civilian, if one might judge from his dress. His features were good. That's the description of him. And then the really important part of this, and what really sets up what's going to happen in the second and especially the third sections of this, is this section. He closed his eyes in order to fix his last thoughts upon his wife and children. The water, touched to gold by the early sun, the brooding mist, the piece of drift, all had distracted him, and now he became conscious of a new disturbance. Striking through the thoughts of his dear ones was a sound which he could neither ignore nor understand, a sharp, distinct, metallic percussion. It had the same ringing quality. He awaited each stroke with impatience. The intervals of silence grew progressively longer, the delays became maddening. They hurt his ear. What he heard was the ticking of his watch. If you take that paragraph, and at the beginning of it, it talks about he closed his eyes in order to fix his last thoughts upon his wife and children. Well, when you get to the end of section 3, that's what he's going to get to. He's finally going to get home. He's going to get back to his wife and children, or almost. And the rest of that, all that description of the watch and how time seems to be slowing down for him, and it seems like it's longer and longer between each tick of his pocket watch, what that sets up for you is Bierce playing with time and the movement of time and how much time passes in section 3. So it foreshadows both the end of the story and the last thing he's going to see is his wife and kids, and the way that time is going to be sort of bent and warped in the third section of the story. He unclosed his eyes and saw again the water below him. If I could free my hands, I might throw off the noose and spring into the stream. By diving, I could evade the bullets, and swimming vigorously, reach the bank, take to the woods, and get away home. Well, that's the whole thing that he imagines in section 3 of the story. So the story is setting you up to trick you into the entire section 3. My home, thank God, is as yet outside their lines. As these thoughts, which have been here set down in words, were flashed into the doomed man's brain, the sergeant stepped aside. And so what you get at the end of section 1 is the sergeant steps off the other end of the board, and so it would tip him and he would fall into the water. The second section is totally a flashback. The purpose, it's tucked into the middle of this story. It has really only one purpose. It is this flashback to explain why he is being hung, how he got in this situation. What you get described in the second section is an advance Union Army scout who is clearly riding ahead and trying to figure out if the Confederates are sympathetic, if they might be dangerous to the Union Army as it advances. So you have this Union Army scout, and he is disguised as a Confederate soldier, because what he's trying to do is figure out if there are any Confederate sympathizers that they need to be worried about. And he's right, because Farquhar, Farquhar and his wife invite this guy in. A gray-clad soldier rode up to the gate and asked for a drink of water. The gray-clad would be the gray uniform of the Confederacy. Miss Farquhar was only too happy to serve him with her own white hands. While she was gone to fetch the water, her husband approached the dusty horseman. The Yanks are repairing the railroad. They have reached the Owl Creek Bridge, put it in order, and built a stockade on the other bank. What you get, though, is, how far is it to Owl Creek Bridge? Farquhar asked. About 30 miles. Is there no force on this side of the creek, the side that he would be coming from? Only a picket post half a mile out. Suppose a man, a civilian and student of hanging, should elude the picket post and perhaps get the better of the sentinel. I was there a month ago. I observed that the flood of last winter had lodged a great quantity of driftwood against the wooden pier at this end of the bridge. It is now dry and would burn like tow. The lady had now brought the water, which the soldier drank. What the soldier is telling him is that he could, if a Confederate sympathizer could sneak to the bridge, they could light all of that wood that's up against the support beam of the bridge, the support of the bridge that's down in the water. They could light that on fire and maybe burn down the bridge and slow the Union Army down. So this Union scout is trying to trick Farquhar and see if he will try to burn the bridge down. He falls for the trick. He tries to burn the bridge. They catch him because they've obviously trapped him into this. They catch him, so you find out why he's going to be hanged. That section ends with, an hour later, after nightfall, he repassed the plantation, going northward in the direction which he had come. He was a Federal scout. So you find out that he's not a Confederate soldier. He's a Union Army scout who's trying to check and see if there's any Confederate sympathizers. That's how they catch Farquhar, trying to burn the bridge. That's why he's being hung. And then you get the long third section, the longest piece of this story. It's several pages long. Here's the second section, the little flashback that you get. And then here's the long third section. The whole third section tells the story of Farquhar's supposed escape. As Farquhar, it basically picks up right where the end of section 1 left off. As Farquhar fell straight downward through the bridge, he had lost consciousness and was as one already dead. From this state he was wakened. And then at the bottom of 397 and top of 398, if you have the book, you have the first sort of, I made a list of these sort of miraculous things that happen, and I'm going to try to go through them. because part of what happens in this third section is this series of things happen that are essentially impossible. They're not impossible, they could have happened, but all of them happening one after another is almost impossible. But because of the way the story has set up this, just reporting the facts, this sort of realistic description, it just feels like it's telling you, first this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And if you don't stop and think, you're like, it's incredible that these 10 things happened one after another. Here's what happens when Farquhar escapes. So he falls through the bridge, and the rope catches him, and his neck doesn't break. And if you know anything about hanging, dropping off a bridge and hanging by your neck, and instead of your neck breaking when you catch, you swing like a pendulum until the rope breaks, that's incredible by itself. Most people, if they fell more than a few feet like that, their neck would break and that's how they would die. Instead, he swings like a pendulum until the rope magically breaks. That's on page 398 if you've got a book. It's in that it's in this first full paragraph of section 3. The next thing that happens is when the rope breaks, he falls into Owl Creek, and then he gets his hands are tied behind his back. Well, somehow in the middle of page 398, again if you've got a book, he manages to get his hands tied behind his back. He manages to get them free and get them untied. So the second sort of miraculous thing is, while he's underwater in the middle of this creek, gets his hands untied behind his back. The third thing that happens is then, once his hands are untied, he reaches up and again, still underwater, still swimming around in the water, gets the noose off of his neck. And then at the bottom of 398, and it's in this paragraph that is, he was now in full possession of his physical senses. They were indeed preternaturally keen and alert. And you get this paragraph, it's really the next two paragraphs, where he has this hypersensory, it's the story's way of sort of hinting at how this is all a dream. He has all of these hypersensory, dreamlike experiences where he saw the individual trees, the leaves and the veining of each leaf. So he's floating around in this creek, almost just had his neck broken, and yet he can see the veins in each leaf. Yeah, right. He noted the prismatic colors and all the dewdrops upon a million blades of grass. He can suddenly see each individual blade of grass. The humming of the gnats, the dragonfly's wings, the water spider's legs. And so what you are getting is this dreamlike description, this hypersensory description of all these details. Again, it's the story kind of hinting that what's happening is not real. It's an illusion or a hallucination or a dream or something like that. In reality, as he is falling to his death. The next thing that happens after that, and on 399 if you've got a book, and then this paragraph that starts off, suddenly he heard a sharp report, and something struck the water smartly within a few inches of his head. This is what sort of snaps him back, because the company of soldiers that were on the northwest side of the bridge start shooting at him. If you notice, a bunch of soldiers shoot at him, they all miss. And somehow he manages in this hypersensory experience to, 100 yards away, 200-300 yards away, looks up and can see the color of one of the guy's eyes. Again, this sort of hint that this is this like dreamlike, imagined thing. That's in the paragraph. The man in the water saw the eye of the man on the bridge gazing into his own through the sights of the rifle. Let's see if we can find that. Here it is. He observed that it was a gray eye and remembered having read that gray eyes were keenest. So again, while he's in a creek looking up, he can somehow see the color of this guy's eye. Again, another hint that what's happening is not real. This hypersensory, dreamlike quality. All these soldiers shoot at him and miss, and then the entire company, you get this company attention, shoulder arms, ready, aim, fire. The leader of the company of soldiers has them all fire at him at once. They magically all miss. It's almost like some cartoon or Superman where like everybody misses because you're the hero. They all shoot at him and miss, and then on page 400, at the bottom of 399, top of 400, after they all miss, they shoot a cannonball at him, and it just hits in the water, misses him, makes a little wave that goes over his head but doesn't hurt him. So now a whole company of soldiers have missed him. A cannonball has missed him, just gave him a little wave, a little wave went over his head, no big deal. They will not do that again, he thought. The next time they will use a charge of grape. If you don't know what they will not do that again, the next time they will use a charge of grape, what he's talking about there is instead of the next time, instead of shooting a cannonball at him, they're going to pile a bunch of pellets, almost like shooting a shotgun blast out of a cannon. They'll pile a bunch of small little pellets or small cannonballs so that when it comes out, you're getting this shotgun effect where you're getting like a dozen little cannonballs instead of one big cannonball, which would be much more dangerous because it would spread out and hit a bunch more things. So he knows that the next time they'll shoot that grape shot at him, and his chances of it missing him are worse. Except that then, even as the soldiers continue to shoot at him, they shoot grape shot at him, and it misses too. That is on right around the middle of page 400. A whiz and a rattle of grape shot among the branches. Here it is right here. A whiz and a rattle of grape shot among the branches high above his head roused him from his dream. The baffled cannoneer had fired him a random farewell, and he rushed up the sloping bank and plunged into the forest. So he's back in the wood. The grape shot misses. He gets into the woods, and he's headed home. All that day he traveled. This is where the woods come back into play. It's all woods on the southwest side. All that day he traveled, laying his course by the rounding sun. The forest seemed interminable. Nowhere did he discover a break in it, not even a woodman's road. He had not known he lived in so wild a region. Again, that wild region, that's because it's a dream, it's a hallucination. There was something uncanny in the revelation. By nightfall, he was fatigued and footsore and famishing. The thought of his wife and children urged him on. Now we've gotten to the point in the story where we're back to section 1 ended. He's almost made it back to his wife and his family. He's almost made it back home. The thought of his wife and children urged him home. At last he found a road which led him into what he knew to be the right direction. It was wide and straight as a city street, yet it seemed untraveled. Overhead, as he looked up through this rift in the woods, shone great golden stars looking unfamiliar. Again, it's like because he's in a dream world. And grouped in strange constellations. The wood on either side was full of singular noises. And then his neck was in pain. And lifting his hand to it, he found it horribly swollen. He knew that it had a circle of black where the rope had bruised it. What you're getting right here is these last 3 paragraphs are the end of the story. Time has almost caught back up with him. This is where, in reality, he is almost at the bottom of the rope. He is about to die. He knew that it had a circle of black where the rope had bruised it. His eyes felt congested. He could no longer close them. His tongue was swollen with thirst. And then, in the next to last paragraph, this story has a tense change in it that's important to pay attention to. This entire story has been told in past tense. His neck was in pain. By nightfall, he was fatigued. All that day, it's not travel, it's traveled. The whole story is in past tense until this next to last paragraph. Despite his suffering, he had fallen. So still past tense. He had fallen asleep while walking. For now, he sees. Not he saw, but he sees. And in this next to last paragraph, the story shifts into present tense. And the reason it does that is it is teaching you time is about to catch back up with itself. The hallucination, the dream is almost over. Time is almost, just like what happened with it felt like time was slowing down at the end of the first section as he was listening to his watch, the seconds tick on his watch. Time's about to catch up with itself. It's about to shift back into present tense. Perhaps he has merely recovered from a delirium. He stands at the gate of his own home. All is as he left it, and all bright and beautiful in the morning sunshine. He must have traveled the entire night. As he pushes open the gate, passes up the wide white walk, he sees a flutter of female garments. His wife, looking fresh and cool and sweet, steps down from the veranda to meet him. We've gotten back to the end of section 1. He's made it to what he had decided his last thoughts would be. He springs forward with extended arms. As he's about to clasp her, he's almost to his wife. He's about to hug her. He feels a stunning blow on the back of his neck. A blinding white light blazes all about him with a sound like the shock of a cannon. Then all is darkness and silence. And then we're back into past tense. We're back done. Time has caught up with itself. The hallucination is over. Peyton Farquhar was dead. His body, with a broken neck, swung gently from side to side beneath the timbers of Owl Creek Bridge. So what you get in the three sections of this story are that realistic, journalistic description in section 1, and then the flashback in section 2 that explains how he got into this situation, why he's being hung. And then in section 3, you get, it's almost totally this hallucination, this dream he has as he's falling to his death. But it is told in the same straightforward reporting style that the first section was, so it tricks you into believing that it's true and external reality. That's what the section 1 is: objective, external, outer reality. Section 3 is straightforward, objective narration, but it's internal reality. It's what's happening inside his mind, not in the outer world. And what happens at the end of section 3 is we jump back out of his mind and into external, realistic reality. We're back, and what you get, the way that the story can trick you into believing that section 3 is really happening, is that it has set you up with that straightforward, objective, journalistic reporting style in section 1 and then the flashback in section 2. That's why this story is a part of American literature, because it is taught as this, even though it has this twist ending and has this whole section, the biggest section of the story is this just psychological internal description. It is all told and narrated in this sort of straightforward third-person journalistic reporting style. So it is made to feel like everything is objectively happening, even though the third section is happening inside his mind. That's why, like I said, this story is sort of on the Mount Rushmore of realism in American literature. This story is from, like I said, the 1890s. This story in Chickamauga, which is also in the textbook, and is from that same 1889, 1890, 1891, the high point really of Bierce's career before all those tragedies really sort of turned him bitter. The Devil's Dictionary came later in the late 1890s and right around 1900 at the turn of the century. So these are the two pieces of literature that he's known for, Chickamauga and Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, the two that are in this story. But Owl Creek Bridge is by far and away the most famous because of that combination of the realistic style and the hallucination and twist ending in section 3. So that covers Owl Creek Bridge for us. I'm going to take a second and jump into, I have a tendency to forget this, but I'm not going to forget it this time. The Bierce response topic for the paper, if you want to write it, it's one of the options. In an Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, Bierce uses realistic details, limited third-person narration. That's the limited third-person narration. The limit is it's always just focusing on him. And in section 1, it's external, but the camera's always watching him. In section 3, it's internal. It's inside. The camera shoots inside his mind and tells you what's happening inside his mind. Bierce uses realistic details. Well, we went through all the realistic details, especially in section 3, but there's a bunch in section 1 where they give you this almost boring, slow description of where the company of soldiers is and who's standing where on the bridge and all these basic, like I said, journalistic, realistic details, limited third-person narration, and a tense shift at the end. Well, we just went through that too, to lead the reader to the twist ending. What this is really asking you is, how does he make the twist ending work? Explain how and where in the story these details and devices work, as well as how effective they are. What this topic's really asking you is, how does the story pull off the trick? How does it use the first and second sections to set you up for the twist of the third section and to make you believe that the third section is real and external, when in reality it's all real but internal. So how does it create this realistic feeling world? This is due next class period if you decide you want to do this one. So the class after, we're talking about Owl Creek Bridge. If you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer them for you over email or however it's convenient for you. But that's Ambrose Bierce and Owl Creek Bridge. Again, if you've got questions, be in touch. Otherwise, thank y'all for your time, and I'll see you next time.